The reason why I wanted to talk to you specifically is because basically I'm not sure if everyone listening knows or even if you yourself know this, but I'm in Melbourne, Australia. We had the longest lockdowns in the entire world. Combined, our lockdowns went for 9 months. It wasn't back to back 9 months, but combined 9 months. And I don't know what a mental breakdown is, but I pretty much had some sort of version of
Yeah.
that. Hence the podcast stopping, and I just couldn't do anything. And so I brought you here to kind of talk about this, and we're also going to talk about the impact of the pandemic on kids and everything. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation because this is very personal for me as well. So thank you again.
How did I get involved? So it was my calling, and it actually started when I was 5. So I was led to do this work. And my mom's friend Angela, when I was 5, asked me what I wanted to be. And I'm the daughter of Italian immigrants. We're the only people in the U.S. So I was bilingual. And Angela said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "A psychiatrist." And I had no exposure, and it literally came out of my mouth. And and so then I along the way I realized a psychiatrist is a pill pusher, and that was not what I wanted to do. And I was like, I want to be a mental health, provider. And I started working with kids, and I just loved working with kids because, kids don't know they can't get better, and they don't ever they're not operating out of fear. They're
Right.
operating out of growth. They have a growth mindset. And they're like, "Okay, Dr. Rowe just told me that 100% we're going to lick this thing and we're going to move past this anxiety, and she's got the care plan and that's what we're going to do." And so and then the mom or the dad is nail biting, and they're just, they're fear hijacked. And I get that, but you have to move, you have to take micro steps
Hmm.
towards change. So over time, and this is my 30th year in mental health,
Wow.
and yeah, I know I started when I was young. And what happened is, I just started getting the most crisis kind of cases, like extreme cases, and people to this day still fly in to work with me. And I work with people. I actually have a family in New Zealand. I send people equipment. It's not easy to get things to New Zealand.
No.
And I've had things sent back. So, and they've taken some of my supplements that I send my bestie who lives in New Zealand. So, but that's neither here than there. So, what kids really need support, and so do families, and that's just sort of what I love to do. And the crisis of mental health has been going on way longer than this pandemic. I
Yeah.
mean, some of the statistics are so startling. 54.2% of kids have a physical or mental health problem. That's 11 years ago. We already are at epidemic levels of, anxiety, depression. Right now, 14% of 10 to 24-year-olds have a clinically diagnosable condition.
Wow.
I mean, that's across the globe. I mean, that's pretty extreme. Our rates of anxiety and depression and suicide are really high. So, right before the pandemic, January of 2020, I started the Global Institute of Children's Mental Health, and really, I have this mission that I want to change the way we view and treat children's mental health. But I really have a vision that we can use science-backed solutions, and that's what I love about doing these podcasts and all these hundreds of media things I've been on, because we don't know what we don't know. And what I want people to know is that science tells us how to improve mental health. We do not have a science led mental health system. And instead, we fall back on practices that don't really have a lot of efficacy for changing behavior. And there's so much people can do. I always want to be the hope spreader. No matter what's going on, we can improve things. Listen, each situation is unique, and I want to honor that, right? And also part of why I love working with kids is, parents, whether it's a crisis and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we have to do this." I had somebody call me today, and was an old client, one of my top 10 favorite moms and why is she one of my top 10 favorite moms? She really is committed to her kids. She doesn't just say she is, her actions reflect it. And she's just a great lady. I just enjoy her in so many ways and is open minded about holistic therapies and just a really, really good mom, trying her best, right? And her kids are such a reflection of how wonderful her and her husband are. And her kid was in an emotional crisis and she had a safe space, we were able to work it out, and it happens under the best of circumstances and the worst. And so when somebody's in crisis, where do you go for help? What do you do? And often in most places across the globe, it becomes a hospital. Right? If somebody's in crisis, and what is a crisis? Extreme crisis is feelings of self-harm, um or harming others, and that's a safety issue, but there's a lot of in between in a crisis level where you're not going to get admitted. And what do? I have providers, I work with extreme cases, and people fly to me, uh not just because I'm great at what I do, because I really am results oriented and love what I do. It's because they have nowhere to go, and I'm just not okay with that. Your friend's issues, I'm sure, unless it was a traumatic event, just didn't happen overnight. There were those warning signs along the way. So that's when we want to get in. I think people just, not I think, I know people are not aware of warning signs, Talia. Like, before you broke down, you probably had sleep problems. You probably had gastrointestinal. You probably had headaches, whatever physical way it manifested. That's the first sign of mental illness, or struggles or agitation, a hyperactivated nervous system. And people miss that. We are moving towards a culture. The American culture is one of the most intensely stressed cultures of any culture that I am aware of. And
Mhm.
considering that I actually work with people all over the world, including like Hong Kong and Canada, like I had a Canadian mom call this week and I was like, bring her in. I love the Canadians. They know how to have a little balance. You know what I mean? They have to work
Yeah.
really hard because they don't have too much sun. So, so it's just a different culture. And um, so we have to work in our lives to counter these things. And it's about lifestyle components. And, when those difficulties happen, what are we doing? And if we are now thinking that we can just run on empty, and the pandemic said, that ain't happening. And that was a wake up call. It also was awareness for people, like some people, many people like yourself, Talia, first time coming to me ever without a history of problems.
Yep.
And I think that is just a hum of the world, that we are so stressed.
Yep.
And the isolation was brutal.
Yeah. It really, really, really was.
It's so much about those little components that, just like you didn't overnight feel better, you had to lean into what was working for you.
Right. And I also had to drop the judgment. Like that was one of the things was I was like,
Yeah.
I was being very harsh with myself. And my therapist said that he's like, you're really putting a lot of expectations on yourself where there are already expectations.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
and so dropping that and just being a bit more gentle. And even like, so I was like, okay, sometimes I would go for walks every day. That was the only thing I looked forward to, like on the beach. And sometimes I just once or twice, not very often because I was pretty consistent, but once or twice I didn't go. And instead of berating myself for not going, I just was like, okay, so just be gentle. That's what you need today. It's okay for you to sit on the
Absolutely.
couch and watch another episode of whatever, you know.
Right. But then the next day you did something else, right?
Yeah,
You know what
I
I
would
mean?
make sure I went the next day.
Yeah.
But I would normally, in a normal circumstance, I wouldn't let myself get away with it.
Right.
I've got a rule that I show up, you put on your gym gear, you show up, and then if after 5 minutes you still don't want to be there, you can leave. But I've never left. I've always put my gym clothes on, gone there, and then you're like, oh, I'm here now, I may as well work out. That's what
Yeah.
happens,
Right.
right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So
So,
what were your lessons from this
well,
experience?
my lessons were,
What are good nuggets you took away?
some of them were like, sometimes you just need to be gentle with yourself. The judgment doesn't help. Like you're putting more pressure
Mhm.
on yourself and you're creating something that doesn't have to be there. Like the added stress of your judgment on yourself. And so when I pulled back and I was just like, it's okay. Like I really tried to follow my advice, because I said this to a friend once, was she was being so harsh on herself. And I said, would you talk to me that in the same way? And she was like, never. And I said, so why are you talking to
Yeah.
yourself like that? And so I treated myself like I was a friend rather than myself, having all these
Yeah.
expectations.
Treat yourself. What would you say to your friend? Love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Right?
And also another thing, I used to be a behavioral therapist with children with autism. And one of the things was once I got out of that, I started using a lot of the techniques on myself.
Hmm.
And one of the things, this is not actually a behavioral therapy thing, but I use it as a prompt. Every time something hard came up, I'd ask myself, is that helpful? Is that helpful? Is what you're doing right now helpful? Like if I'm berating myself, is that helpful? You know, or the other thing as well, like if you're making like poor like eating choices, I'd be like, a friend of mine told me, this is actually such a great one. Like you see you're eating some chocolate, she'd be like, speak it out loud. So it's fine for you to eat the chocolate as long as you're not blindly just shoving it in your face and not making the decision. So it's like she'd say, oh, I'm choosing to eat this chocolate now. And then
Yeah.
he'd eat it.
Right. She wasn't trying to shove it down, right, as a
Yeah.
coping mechanism. Right.
Yes,
You know?
exactly. She was like, "Oh, I'm really going to enjoy this, and I'm choosing to have this chocolate right now."
Yeah.
So
And then your brain, you don't even have an opportunity to be cruel to your, judgmental, all those things that hold you back, right? And those are behavioral patterns, just like you saw with children with autism. Anything that you've learned that is not serving you can be unlearned, but you have to make the shifts to unlearn it.
yeah, and you have to be aware. And sometimes I'd even be aware that I'm not aware. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm not in an aware
Oh,
state
yeah.
today. Like I'm
Hmm.
just, and that's okay. Or I'm going to be tired. Or I'm going to, self-preserve and turn my phone off. Whatever it is. But I also learnt what I need to thrive. Like I need
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
I need to
You
go and
need exercise, I heard.
I need exercise.
You need connection with people, right?
Yep. Yep.
And this pandemic is evolving. We don't know, will there ever be a lockdown again? We all want to believe no.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is to that,
No, me either.
and as we move into, a full second year of this, right? Going into the third year, there's a lot of hills on this roller coaster, and that's why we do have to recalibrate and sort of buckle up, buckle in, and find what works for us, right? Like,
Mm.
little moments of joy, like trying to get joy out of the moments, right? And coping skills are the foundation for mental health of everybody of all ages. If you don't have a resource toolkit, you're not going to have anything to lean on, and you might binge watch Netflix or drink 3 to 6 glasses of alcohol a night, which a lot of people do,
Mhm.
and then they're like, I'm not an alcoholic. And I'm like, what is an alcoholic, so we can switch from unhealthy coping to good coping, and it's going to just take a little purposeful effort and some concentration, and you have to be kind to yourself if it isn't perfect, because healing is never perfect. It looks like the stock market, hopefully with
Mhm.
a positive trend.
And we also need to learn the toolbox, right?
Right, right. But just like the treadmill, you got to use it. You can't just buy the beautiful, drill and then hang it up in the garage. You got to actually build some stuff with it. So I think
Right.
that's so important. And just like you said, those little micro steps. We all want the magic wand when we're not feeling well, if we're physically sick or we're just internally we're worried thinking, we're fear-based thinking, whatever's going on, we want it to just go away. And it can go away, but it's going to just take some changes in your actions and behaviors. And it just starts with one thing that's healthy and consistently doing it.
Thanks for listening to the Rebel Love Podcast, the podcast about love, sex, and relationships. If you like this episode, please support us by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform, and find all the details of this episode and more at rebellove.com/podcast.